Hi guys, Jackie M here, and I know I keep changing, right? The layout is different, so you're facing a different part of my studio. And I'm also using YouTube for the first time in a couple of months as well. So I'm broadcasting to you live via YouTube. And if you're watching this from YouTube, I have to forewarn you because most of my followers on YouTube struggle to differentiate between a live broadcast and a tightly edited video. This is a live broadcast, so I'm making something from start to finish with no cuts in between. So you have to tolerate that, or you have to hop off now instead of complaining about why this is taking so long, okay? To everyone else, yeah, welcome. And I just want to, before I go on, I want to thank Lenovo Australia for providing me with the laptops that I use to run my broadcast with. And I'm running my broadcast from a gaming laptop over in the far end. You can't see it on camera. And I'm monitoring the comments, hopefully, from my other Lenovo device, which is a desktop slash tabletop tablet. So it's this huge one over here, beautiful. And also I'm going to be recording the overhead shot using my Yoga 900. And also I want to thank Rode Australia for supplying me with all the microphones I use in my broadcast. And of course, today I'm going to be using Sunbeam appliances as well. So I've got one here, and excuse the noise because I actually turned this on a few minutes ago and it's just starting to heat up now. And what this is a Sunbeam steamer. It's a tabletop electric steamer. So I've got some water in here, you can see it. And it's got a couple of layers. I won't be using this today. And the other Sunbeam appliance I'm going to be using is my Sunbeam dough mixer over here, okay? And I'm going to be making some dough in here because what I'm making today is homemade noodles. So we'll see how we go. Just give me a second while I hop onto my feed just to make sure I'm not missing any comments. Because I'm broadcasting from YouTube, my comments don't automatically filter through to me, so I may miss it, but if you're watching from Facebook, from Twitter, anywhere, just say hello and I'll try and catch them and respond to them. Otherwise, I'll respond to them after the broadcast, okay? So today, I'm going to be making some homemade noodles. I've experimented with a number of different recipes over the years, and today's no different. I'm going to be experimenting with a different one as well. And essentially, it's going to be based on my own family's recipe for Hakka, what we call panne in Hakka, right? Which is a Hakka kind of like egg sheets, kind of if you can think of pappardelles sort of thing, but a Chinese version of it and a Hakka version too good, right? And essentially the ingredients are just plain flour, egg, a little bit of salt and water. Now I'm going to be, like I said, I'm going to kind of like play around with it a little bit so you can see, just kind of experiment at home as well. But lots and lots of recipes for egg noodles out there. See what works for you. So today, with that base, I'm going to, like I said, tweak it a little bit and see how it turns out, right? And in the meantime, I've got a pot of water, like I said, which is starting to boil now. I'm just going to turn it right down. But I'm going to show you a couple of different ways you can use your noodles after you've made it, okay? So just let me grab the dough mixer. I'm tempted to kind of like do it over here, but I'm sure people are going to complain it's too far away, they can't see what's happening. Okay, maybe I will anyway, okay, because I don't want to have to carry it across. So this is my dough mixer bowl, right, with the dough hook. And I've got this, just plain flour. There's a ½ kilo plain flour. And to that, I'm going to just throw an egg. Egg is actually optional in this recipe, right? But some people use more eggs, some use less, some don't use eggs at all. This is actually, I mean, for this amount of flour, you can use as many as 4 eggs, right? Or you can use no eggs at all. So it's a very, very versatile. Making noodles is really quite simple. I'm just going to throw some salt in it, so just give me a second. Okay, so I'm just going to add a healthy pinch of salt in there. And to that, I want water. What did I do with my water? Okay. Just, I'm sure I've got it somewhere here. Just give me a second, I'm going to grab some water. Okay, so I've got about, how much is there? About 200 mils of water. I'm going to actually finesse the recipe a little bit to see how this turns out. May not, may require some finesse at the end. So keep an eye out for my website's posting of the recipe. So my website is at jackiem.com.au, and you can find a bunch of different recipes of all my live broadcasts there. But yeah, so we'll see how we go. Like I said, if there are any tweets or whatever, I'll post them online. The other thing I wanted to point out as well is this ingredient here, which I've used in my past broadcasts, in my past recipes, and people get a little bit confused about what it is. And I buy this at my local Asian grocery store, right? I'm just going to come around and show you. Okay, if you can see this, it says literally wheat gluten flour. Sometimes it says gluten flour. So it doesn't even have a proper label on it. And I stumbled upon it in my shopping in the past. But what I find it does, essentially what they use this for is to make vegetarian gluten puffs and that sort of stuff, right? Which I'll cover in a separate broadcast later on. But what I use it for, because this is basically essentially a very strong gluten flour. Like I said, this is just plain flour. And gluten, what gluten does is that it helps to add stretchiness to your bread dough and that sort of stuff. So you can use plain flour, that's fine, but if you want a little bit more stretchiness, you can add a little bit of this to it. Usually what I would use for this is to a pound or a kilo, I would add, to a pound, I'd add like about 2 teaspoons of gluten flour, right? I'm just going to, so this is about just over a pound. Is it a pound? Yeah, this is about half a kilo, so it's just over a pound. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of this just to help with the stretchiness. Mind you, this is not usually what I do if I were just making the hakka pan mi, right? The hakka pan mi, we don't usually use this. But I figure because we're making noodles, which are more, which I'm going to roll into thin strips and cut into thin strips that maybe could use some stretchiness in it. And another ingredient I'm going to show you, right? I think I've showed this to you before, but I'm just going to pull it out. Here. Okay, I can't find it at the moment, but I'm going to use an alternative, which is a baking powder. What I was going to show you is something called gansui. I'm sure it's just staring at me and I just can't see it. Nope, can't see it. Okay, it's hiding somewhere, but I've got several bottles of it and I just can't seem to find it at the moment. It's called a lye water. The label will say lye water. You can buy them at Asian grocery stores, but in Australia, or certainly in New South Wales anyway, it's a restricted product, right? So they don't display them on shelves because all it looks like is a bottle of clear water, and apparently kids have in the past mistaken it for like bottled water and bought it and chugged it, and it's actually corrosive because it's actually alkaline. So it's called lye water. It's actually alkaline water, and what it does is that it adds the al dente texture to noodles, right? So instead of like your noodles being really soft, it will kind of like make it a little bit crunchy, gives it that little bit of bounce. Alternatively, you can use baking powder. So I'm just gonna, I never actually use baking powder, but I'm just gonna throw some baking powder in here. So I'm gonna throw about a teaspoon in there. Now, again, when I make hakka pan mi, I don't use this at all. Homemade hakka pan mi noodles, just plain flour, eggs, water, and salt. Okay, so like I said, because I'm trying, experimenting a little bit, I'm just adding a few other ingredients in there. But technically, you can get away with making homemade noodles with just flour, water, and salt, and egg if you want. Okay, so I'm just going to throw this in there. If you've got any questions at all, don't forget to hit me up. I should eventually come across your comments, okay? So I'm just gonna start with a low setting, put the lid on, and just increase it a little bit. And like I said, I've got some water in here. I'm gonna throw a bit of salt in here. And this is going to be used for both boiling the noodles and also for steaming it, okay? So in it goes. Just let me pull up here we go. Okay. Let me pull up YouTube so I can make sure I'm not missing any comments here. So what you want to end up with, and by the way, if you do add gluten, let me explain a little bit about that gluten flour I put in. What it does is basically it increases the gluten content in your flour, makes it more stretchy. In the absence of you being able to stumble across this, like I did at my Asian grocery store, you can use bread flour, okay? And having said that, I just want to clarify when I say bread flour, all I mean is strong flour. Here in Australia, in the supermarkets, we get flour that's labeled as bread flour, and all it is flour that has a higher gluten content in it, which is suitable for baking bread, okay? It doesn't mean flour that already has the yeast and all that built into it for you to be able to kind of like add water and chuck in the oven, okay? That's not what I mean by bread flour. Bread flour in Australia just means flour with a higher gluten content, suitable for making breads, okay? And otherwise it's just known as strong flour. But again, if you can't find either of that, just plain flour works fine. And the other thing I've got to mention as well, if you do use gluten, right, it will basically make your flour basically need more water for it to work. Okay, so I'm just going to add a little bit more water in here. So whatever it is you're working with when you're tweaking a recipe, if it calls for plain flour and you add you're using strong flour, you're going to find that you're going to need to increase the range of the water. Okay? Okay, so this is what it looks like. This is like quite a rough. You want to actually be able to work this for about 5 minutes, okay, in the dough mixer. I'm just gonna get a feel for it now. It's still quite lumpy. And then I'm gonna throw it back into the dough mixer for a little bit longer. about the soup that I'm going to make for this dish, right? Because I'm making this for my baby Noah, and the reason why I decided to make noodles today is because Eva just came back from overseas, and there's really usually I have like a big stockpile of all kinds of noodles in the fridge, but you know, because we've been overseas, we cleared out the fridge before we left, so there's nothing sitting around at home, and I live in a part of Sydney where it's not that easy to pick up Asian ingredients. But yeah, as far as the soup that I'm going to be using for this recipe, this is a lot smoother. I really should work it a little bit more, but you know. The other thing I want to mention as well, if I were making, if I were using the lime water that I mentioned, it would actually turn this dough quite yellow in hue. Okay, so if ever you go shopping for Asian noodles, Asian egg noodles, and you see them really yellow, the yellow doesn't actually come from the eggs; it comes from the lime water. Okay, and generally, because of its corrosive properties, you know. Generally, you don't want something that has that looks too bright yellow because you know they use a lot of it in there. Okay, so this is it here. Now, if I were making hakka banh mi, right, like I mentioned, this would be a lot softer. But like I said, because we're making noodles, we want this a little bit tougher. And usually, when we were making hakka banh mi or banh mi, I'm so used to calling it banh mi because that's what my dad used to call it, right? This is a Hakka name for it. What we would do is actually bounce it. Because I mentioned this before in past broadcasts, the Chinese, because you know, I'm Chinese, born in Malaysia. The Chinese are big on the whole concept of how we say in Hakka, which means that it's the texture is bouncy, right? And the idea when you're eating things like dumplings or fish balls and you know the dumpling skins and all that, it's all about the texture and how like bouncy it is in your mouth, right? So it's not just about whether a dish is salty or sweet or sour enough for your liking. It's also about how it feels in your mouth. So the idea is that that texture, the bouncy texture, is achieved by throwing your dough or your fishbowl paste or whatever around until you basically in the throwing process you kind of make it bouncy because you expel a lot of the air bubbles in the dough. Okay. So this is what I've got, right? Ideally, you would want to let it rest, but I'm not going to make you guys wait for half an hour while this is resting. Yeah, so I was mentioning the soup that I'm going to be making for this dish. I don't know if I'll have time to do it now. We'll see how we go. But the soup, if you've seen one of my latest videos at YouTube, if you're not watching this at YouTube, go to youtube.com/JackieM. Okay, Jackie M is spelled JACKIEM. And my most recent video will show you how to prepare dried anchovies, or what we call ikan bilis. Okay, and essentially the soup that I'm going to be making consists of dried anchovies that has been, you know, that video shows you how to prepare. So essentially, in a nutshell, I'll talk about it later on, but this is the dough here, and I'm just going to put away a couple of things just to clear up my working space. Okay, so this is the dough, and you know, if you've let it rest, it will look smoother, but I'm just going to cut it up, right? And I've got a pasta machine here. I'm going to set to the widest setting to start with. Now, back in the day when my parents used to make banh mi, I'm just going to turn this up again. When my parents used to make banh mi, right? They used to roll. In fact, they didn't even use to roll it. They used to kind of like tear off chunks of this. I'll show you. They used to stand over a pot of water, tear off chunks of this, right? and then just flatten it like this and stretch it and throw in the water and boil it till it floats up to the top. And these are your hakka banh, okay? So we used to stretch them. It's not very stretchy at the moment because, like I said, this really should rest, and it probably should kind of like be in the dough mixer a little bit longer. But that's how we used to make hakka banh, right? And then the good old Italian immigrants started bringing in these pasta rollers, so we started using the pasta roller for our banh, which gives it a more even, you know, and thinner texture as well, which is how I like it. Okay. And I'm just gonna roll this in the widest setting to start with, a couple of times. And if you don't know my son, Noah, you can't see him there. Okay, you can just barely make him out in the corner. Noah's 4.5, and he's got Down syndrome. And I used to run a Malaysian restaurant, and I gave it up to look after him. That's why I need to clear up my workspace. This is one of the things I do now that I no longer have a restaurant in my live broadcasts. Okay. And like I said, usually you would let the dough rest for a good half hour, you know, an hour or so, covered, of course, otherwise it will go crusty at the top. And then you will cook it up, okay? And by the way, I want to give a shout out to Halal Enterprises because over the course of the next few weeks, I'm going to be cooking dishes that use Asian ingredients that you can buy from Halal Enterprises, okay? Oh, you can buy them, like, you know, if you're not in Australia, you can buy them elsewhere, but Halal Enterprises is one of the distributors of some of the most well-known Malaysian products there are out there in Australia. So, Halal Enterprises in Australia, and they bring in all these fabulous Malaysian products, and I'm going to be talking about them in some of my recipes, in some of my broadcasts. So, you know, if you're just getting started on Malaysian cooking or Asian cooking, and you find it a struggle to figure out what Asian ingredients, what brands and all that, you know, work with what recipes, make sure you keep an eye out for my broadcast, and hit me up with any questions you have, and I'll do my best to help out, okay? So let me turn this down again. So you want to roll these, and then you want to change the setting to a thinner setting and roll them. I mentioned with hakka banh, usually the dough would be softer, whereas when you're making egg noodles, you want the dough to be quite firm, okay? So you use less water. In the dough. Okay, so this is about the midway setting. Yeah. And look, really, making noodles is so versatile that, you know, you can actually start cutting it up now if this is a thick enough. And if you've got one of those dough pasta rollers that actually have the teeth in them, you can use them to cut down your noodles as well. My one doesn't seem to work very well, so I don't use it. I hand cut my noodles, okay? Okay. So you got that. And yeah, I'm going to talk about the soup base that I'm going to be using for this recipe later on. But you can use any kind of soup, right? And if you want to learn how to make Asian broths, you know, those kind of like soups that you have with noodles and all that, you want to, usually it's a chicken stock base. Well, I use chicken because I don't eat pork. I know a lot of Chinese use pork bones, right? I use chicken bones, and what you want to do is you want to buy these chicken carcasses or chicken bones, right, from your local butcher, and they're quite cheap depending on where you buy them. If you buy them from an Asian shop, because what they are, they're basically the frames, right? The bones, the frames from the chicken that the butchers cut out the flesh for, you know, into different types of cuts, like breast fillets and thigh fillets and drumstick fillets and all that. What you've got left is the frame, right? And if you buy it from an Asian shop, they're usually quite cheap. I can pick it up for like 80 cents per kilo or something like that, something ridiculously cheap like that. But the downside is the Asian butchers pretty much cut out, you know, they're like vultures when it comes to the bones, so you get practically no flesh left on them, which is fine because a lot of flavor is from the marrow. But whereas if you buy it from a Western butcher, usually you still have quite a lot of flesh hanging off it, which means that the bones are meatier and probably more flavorsome, but they do cost more as well. So when I buy it from my Australian butcher, it costs about $1.30 a kilo, maybe more, $2 a kilo even, right? So that's the trade-off you got to make. Okay, so that's increase that. So I've got some of these noodles here rolled out, right? And like I said, if you were having a hakka panne, right, we would just be, at this point, just stretching it a little and tossing it into water and boiling it till it floats up, okay? But in this case, I'm gonna first, okay, I'm going to first boil them, right? So let me just move this over here. Hopefully no one doesn't get in the way. Okay, so I've got these strips of noodles, right? And I'm gonna fold them up and cut them up with my Victorinox knife. I'm gonna cut them into about just under 1 centimeter in width. You can do it whatever you want, right? Okay, so this is what it looks like. It's not very beautiful. Okay, this is the edge. And I'm just tossing it in the water, the boiling water over here. No, don't touch anything, please. Okay, be a good boy. And if you're not using this straight away, you want to dust this with flour. And usually we Asians, we use tapioca flour, right? I'm just going to stretch this a little bit. So we Asians use tapioca flour, or you can use corn flour as well. It helps to absorb any liquid in there, okay? So you want to separate them before you toss them in the water. And like I said, I'm tweaking the recipe as I go along because I make the hakka panne a lot, but homemade noodles not so much because a lot of the time it's cheaper to buy. Plus, I buy homemade. I buy like egg noodles for my business, so invariably I always have some left that I use for personal consumption. Okay, so I'm just stretching this a little bit, right, and tossing it in the water. And I remember actually a couple of years ago, one of my live broadcasts was on making udon noodles. So you might want to look it up. Like I said, my YouTube channel is just youtube.com/JackieM. I've got over 200 videos in there. Not all of them are great. But you know, if you watch enough of me cooking, you should be able to cook like me at some point, which isn't such a bad thing. This is all stuck together. So I probably should have dusted it with flour before I throw it in. But I wanted to keep the water fairly clear because I don't like over flouring my noodles, because when you do that, the water ends up getting really foggy and you end up having to change the water if you're cooking large amounts of noodles in it, right? So there's no oil in the water, but if you weren't eating this straight away, what you want to do, okay, so once they float up to the top, they're ready to come out, okay? They won't take long at all to cook, literally seconds. So these are the noodles. I'm gonna hold it up so you can see it, right? If you're not eating it right away, usually what I'm gonna do is I'll have the soup ready to go. I'll throw the noodles into a bowl and pour the soup over it. But you know, if you're not eating this right away, toss it in some oil. Got some oil over here. Toss it in some oil, and it'll keep in the fridge for a few days, right? And of course, you can cut it into thinner lengths as well, and you can cut them thicker like Hokkien noodles, right? What I'm going to do now is I'm going to steam some of them just to give you a point of difference, right? Just a contrast to see how it looks like. And I really should be actually oiling the trays. Give me a second. So I've got, I'm just removing the bracket, but the steamer basket you can see here obviously has holes in them, so that will be fine for what I need to do. And what I want to do now, I'm just going to cover this and turn this steamer, seriously guys, go and look for a tabletop steamer like this. It will save up room on your stove top, and also it's really quite powerful. So I'm going to steam some of this. And again, it shouldn't take long. You want to keep them separate, right? And I used to buy my noodles direct from a factory. It's quite interesting to see how they operate. They've got these big giant trays of noodles that go through. But also, yeah, Asian style food production may be a little bit confronting to Westerners. throw that in. And if you've been watching my broadcast, my live daily broadcast, and wondering why I have been silent the last 10 days, that's because Noah and I went on a cruise, courtesy of Carnival Cruises, and also a Facebook group called the Inner West Moms. There's a story behind it. Again, if you go to jckiem.com.au, I've written a couple of times about the lead up to how we ended up going on a cruise. But basically, we went to the South Pacific. Okay. I'm going to do more noodles. I'm going to boil them, but I'm going to cut them really thin so you can see how they look like. Yeah, so we went to the South Pacific. We were meant originally to go to 4 islands, namely Mystery Island in Vanuatu, Lifu Island in New Caledonia, Numea, also in New Caledonia, and Mare, also in New Caledonia, right? But the weather at Mystery Island wasn't great. Apparently it was storming over there, so they had to have a last-minute change of plans, where we ended up in the Isle of Pines in New Caledonia instead, which was beautiful. But what was interesting, I'm going to talk about the food scene, because that's my interest really. Because I grew up in Malaysia, and I was very curious to know what the locals ate, right? Because I've never been to the Pacific Islands before. And you know what? We went to those beaches, and first of all, I was a little bit concerned, right? Because I'm very cheap, being Asian, that we would end up, when you get 2,000-3,000 people descend from a cruise ship, that you would end up paying cruise ship prices for local products, right? Because I've heard some stories along those lines that everything is kind of jacked up, right? But so we went, first of all, to Isle of Pines, but because it was a last-minute destination, I don't know whether the locals were not anticipating us or whether it is a naturally fairly deserted place anyway. But as far as food offerings, all we had was a stand that sold, look at this. All we had was a stand that sold packets of Pringles and Twisties, right? And of course, being Asian, I don't eat like snacks, like Western snacks anyway. But a pack of Twisties, small pack of Twisties, they were asking $5 Aussie for, right? And we don't pay $5 Aussie for Twisties here in Australia, just so you know. So I kind of thought that, okay, my worst nightmare is realized. Okay, so this is the steamed noodles, and you're going to want to toss it in oil, but you will notice that the steamed noodles are more are firmer, okay? And why that's a good thing is that, first of all, it'll keep longer, right, in the fridge. Second of all, when it's firmer, it's good for stir frying, right? Whereas boiled noodles generally are good for soupy noodles, or for putting like a sauce over and tossing it in, what we call gong lo min in Malaysia, right? In Chinese. But if you steam the noodles, like I said, they're firmer. They'll be a little bit more al dente. If you want to use it in soup, you can, but you will have to remember the texture isn't going to be as silky, slippery, smooth as the boiled noodles, right? But it will be firmer, and also it will be good for stir frying for whatever kind of noodle dish you want to use this for. I'm just tossing more noodles in here. yeah, so that was our experience at the Isle of Pines. And what was really strange, like I said, it was completely deserted. And I kind of thought that what we would have had the opportunity to experience was actually kind of like a local life, right? We thought there'd be like local markets, local people, going about their daily lives, that we can kind of like, experience a little bit of a culture. But no, it was just basically a beach. Again, like I said, I don't know whether it's because the locals weren't foretold that we were coming, or they only had very short notice, hence the lack of food or any kind of like provisions. But the next place we went to was the island of Lifu, which is the biggest island, or one of the biggest islands in New Caledonia. And that had some sort of a local scene, right? But as in that it had like a market, a local market, but selling souvenirs. So not selling local, food for locals or anything, but selling like souvenir arts and craft, selling, what do they have? Food, right? And again, the food, they had someone selling like fresh coconut juice, which was great, but he ran out pretty early on in the day. But as far as food, they sold a lot of like non-exotic food. They were selling like baguettes, sandwiches, wrapped in cling wrap and all that, right? And they sold hot chips, fried chips, and they sold sausages, like sausages in the roll sort of thing. So fairly Australian stuff, and the prices were Australian prices as well. I did take a picture of, someone had left 2 dead bats on their counter, but there was nothing on the menu to suggest they were actually serving it. So I don't know whether they actually had the dead bats there for their consumption or something like that, for dinner later on that night or something. The most exotic thing I saw was chicken curry and rice. It's like chicken curry and coconut rice. I didn't actually see the dish itself, but I did see the signage for it, and they were offering like chicken curry and rice for about $8 or $10 Aussie, right? Because I eat chicken curry all the time, and I think of chicken curry, I associate it with like Asian food. I don't really think of Pacific Islanders eating chicken curry, sort of thing. But I could be wrong. I don't know. So I wasn't inclined to actually buy and try it out, right? So that was Lifu. And the next island we went to was called Mare. And I was told that Mare was going to be basically like a desert, a beach and nothing else, right? It's going to be fairly deserted sort of thing. So I had fairly low expectations of Mare. But when we showed up, there were these guys selling lobster, right? Fresh lobster. They had a grill, and they had a basket of like live lobsters that they were cooking on the grill. But the lobsters, they weren't huge, right? I saw a pretty large one early in the day, but that went quickly. But the lobsters were all one set price, and they were 50 Aussie dollars each. And like I said, they weren't very big by the time I got to them. I figured like, for $50 for a lobster, a fairly small lobster, that was just basically like, thrown on the grill. I figured I could get a bigger and cheaper lobster on board the Carnival Legend, which was the cruise ship, because the cruise ship actually has an upmarket restaurant on board. Well, most of the food on the cruise ship is free, right? So all our meals are provided free. But if you have a special evening or something like that, and you feel like, you want something that's, world class, they have a top-notch restaurant on the top level, where for 45 Aussie dollars, you can have a meal that, with menu options that include lobster, right? Lobster tail, lobster surf and turf, and that sort of stuff. And it was beautiful. I ate there 4 times over the course of 10 days. And that was $45. For $45, you get a 4-course meal that includes lobster. Is better value, I figured, than a smaller lobster that's grilled on the beach, right? So I didn't go with that either. So I didn't get to experience a lot of New Caledonian food. And then our final stop was Noumea, and if you know anything about New Caledonia, Noumea is basically like a city, right? Noumea is modern, right? A lot of French expatriates there, or they could be locals for all I know. And we get to finally experience local life, essentially, right? And to actually check out how much the locals pay for the food that that we were having to fork out for when we were at the islands. And it turned out, like, my thinking that the prices on the islands were actually artificially inflated didn't turn out to be the case. Turns out that Noumea is actually quite expensive. So, a $50 lobster by the beach costs like $60 in Noumea. And I saw while we were on the beach on one of the islands, I think it was Leaf, a bag of lychees, right? In Malaysia, you get lychees, pretty cheap. Bag of lychees, they wanted 15 Aussie dollars for, so I skipped that. And then on the mainland in Noumea, they were actually charging like, more than $15 a kilo a bag of lychees. So essentially, what it comes down to really is that things aren't that cheap in New Caledonia, right? So if you're used to traveling to Bali and to Thailand for cheap food and whatever, to give that up, don't expect to be paying Asian prices, Southeast Asian prices for the stuff that you like. But having said that, the beaches are just incredibly, incredibly beautiful. I've never seen any beaches as beautiful as what I saw in New Caledonia on our cruise ever. So definitely worth a visit. If ever you're inclined to seek a holiday, Carnival Cruises, or you can go there on your own. And let me know about your experience. If you've already been there, right? Tell me how your experience compares with mine. Okay, just turn it down. Okay, just turn it back up. Tell me how your experience compares with mine. What you think of the local food, and whether I missed out on something. Right? Okay. So I'm just going to show you what the rest of this looks like. You can see why I don't make my own noodles more often, because this is very labor intensive, right? Okay, so this is the next, okay, so this was the first batch, and this was the next batch where I kind of like cut it thinner. Okay, so these are just homemade noodles. They're so cheap to produce that, it's easy enough to make on your own, as long as you have the patience to boil the noodles in batches. Okay, so quickly about the soup, right? I'm going to show you. I mentioned ikan bilis earlier, which is the dried anchovies. Check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/JackieM. There are a couple of videos there on how to prepare dried anchovies. One's like 3 minutes long and one's only a minute long. But basically, what it involves is, these are what dried anchovies look like. What we call ikan bilis, right? And these are pre-fried. Okay, I fried them up like months ago, and then I stored it basically in a tub. And now that it's fried up, all I need to do is toss it in, toss some of it, probably about a cup and a half of it, into a saucepan, add water. I'm going to add some garlic cloves in it, and I'm just going to boil it, and all the flavor will come out. I'm going to enhance the flavor a little bit. You can add a little bit of usually I add my chicken powder or chicken stock granules, what we Malaysians call the magic powder. You can leave that out if you're averse to having a little bit of MSG in your soup, right? Essentially, it just acts like chicken stock cubes, right? So you can adjust the flavors a little bit, add a little bit more salt if you want or whatever. And the other thing, instead of adding water, I'm going to be adding chicken stock into it, because I always have a lot of chicken stock just from running my business, okay? And I'm just gonna like boil up the soup and let it simmer, let the garlic infuse and the anchovies infuse the stock with some flavor. I'll boil it for about half an hour, and then I'll have the noodles and pour the soup over it, and that's going to be our lunch. Okay, so that'll give you some ideas about what to do. Next time you're stuck at home and you don't have any noodles and you want to eat noodles, you know, these are all these things. Like if you do this, you know, you only need to do this once every 6 months, 12 months, right? And frying it's not hard. Look, like I said, check out my video. I don't want to go through the steps again. Frying is not hard, and you stir it cold and store it cold, and it will keep pretty much indefinitely. And then always have some garlic in your pantry, in your fridge, right? Toss it in and boil it, and that's your soup stock. Okay. So until tomorrow, I'll likely be broadcasting tomorrow from my market stall. That's going to be the final weekly market for the year. For all those people who say they want to catch up with me at the market tomorrow, it's your final chance to do so for about 6 weeks or something till January, late January. Anyway, and if you've got any questions at all, hit me up. Like I said, just post it in the comments. Otherwise, I will see you tomorrow. And Selamat Makan. Just let me hop over there. I'll see you guys. Ciao.